Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on our Evaluation and Impact webinar. We're just doing a quick audio test to make sure you all on the line can hear us. So let us know in the comment box if you're hearing us well, and we'll get started in just a few minutes here. Thanks everyone, it seems like the audio is working well. We'll get started in just about 1 minute. Hi everyone, thanks again for joining us. We're going to get started with our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about evaluation and impact, looking at what grant makers want in this field. So again, thanks for joining us today, spending an hour with us. We're excited to dive in. And so this webinar is in partnership with our Grant Connect platform here at Imagine Canada, and we're excited to share learnings about our recent research on the state of evaluation in Canada, and specifically about how what the role of funders is in evaluation work. So today in the room, you have myself, Alex Gardner. I'm our donor experience coordinator. I was also on our research team previously and spent a lot of time working on this report. So I'm excited to be here to be able to share this research here with you today. We also have another Alex here in the room, Alex Price. He's our outreach and engagement coordinator.
Hi everyone.
He works on our Grant Connect platform, and he'll be helping to manage the question box with us today. And I'm glad to have him here with us. We also have Haley McDonald, who is our Director of Customer Experience and Operations. She's here to lend some commentary and to support us through this webinar today. So thanks for being here, Haley.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for inviting me along.
Great. And so just a bit of housekeeping. So we're using the GoToWebinar platform, and if you're not familiar with it, you'll see that this sidebar on your screen, and that will be the way for you to communicate with us. So you can use the questions box, and that'll send a question to us. Feel free to send questions throughout the webinar. We'll leave some dedicated time at the end for your questions, but feel free to shoot them in there as they come along. And we'll be using this box to get your feedback, and we'll be using the polling feature as well. So stay tuned for those interactive features for you to participate in this webinar. And just for some information about Imagine Canada, about who we are, if you're not familiar, we're a national charitable organization whose mission and cause is charities in Canada. And so we work to amplify the sector's collective voice, to create opportunities to sort of connect and learn from each other, as well as build our capacity as a sector to succeed. So we're presenting here from the Toronto office, but we also have staff in Ottawa and Montreal. And we have, like I said, we have a number of program and resources that sort of strengthen charities and their operations. And so I think we have some people who are connected with us in some way on the line. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a part of our network. It's much appreciated. And specifically, one of the programs that we provide is Grant Connect, which is one of Canada's oldest social enterprises. And I have a question for all of you here today. It's a poll. We're asking, are you a current Grant Connect subscriber to use the platform today? So you'll see a poll launched on the screen, and let us know if you use Grant Connect.
So it looks like we've got about 50% of the folks on the line here are not using Grant Connect yet, and about a third or so are currently using, and about 15% aren't sure. So yeah, so we'll definitely walk you guys through the platform a bit and give you some information there.
Great, and Alex is going to tell us a bit about what Grant Connect is for that percent of you that aren't familiar.
So thanks, Alex. So Grant Connect is essentially a one-stop shop for fundraising research. It's a granting platform that's used by thousands of Canadian charities to find new prospects and win more grants. You're able to use our powerful search technology to help you target donors fast. And you're able to look through over 1.25 million grant records that total over $41 billion in giving. Our team compiles data from multiple sources on the Grant Connect platform, everything from CRA data to mining websites and annual reports, really just taking on as much information as we can so that you guys have as many tools at your disposal to really approach funders with success. Within the system as well, you can look for thousands of diverse funding opportunities, ranging from Canadian foundations. There's over 11,000 Canadian foundation profiles in the system, hundreds of corporate giving programs. We actually monitor all major corporate community investment programs in Canada through Grant Connect. You can also find government grant programs, other types of granting opportunities, and interestingly enough, about 125 American foundations that will support Canadian initiatives and organizations. So definitely giving you guys the full scope of opportunities in terms of funding with grant work.
Thanks, Alex. And we're excited to highlight some of the features that Grant Connect has that can help you with your evaluation work. And so before I begin into our content, I also wanted to do a land acknowledgement to recognize where we're gathered here today. We're acknowledging the land on which we gather, and it's the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And we recognize that for thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, it's the meeting place and still is the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and to have you all join us from wherever you're gathered. So we want to know, where are you joining us from? Let us know in that question and answer box where you're located, and if you know the traditional territory in which you're gathering on, share that with us as well. So give us a shout out in the question box there. So we have people joining us from Toronto, that's great. Some Toronto folks out in Calgary, Alberta, on the West Coast, thank you. Someone from Brazil who is joining us.
Wow.
And Winnipeg, Treaty 1 land, as well as Burlington. So we got people from coast to coast, yeah, and even internationally. So really excited to have you. Oh, some people saying they're from New Brunswick, Surrey, Prince Edward County, the Haudenosaunee territory. So thank you.
Yes, folks from all over.
Yeah, I'm really appreciative to host these webinars and to see people gather from across the country. And it's great that we can get together in this way. So thanks for sharing that with us. And so today we're going to cover a bit about the report, that state evaluation report we released last month, and talk about some of the key learnings related to the role of funders and grant-making organizations, and share some takeaways and our sort of analysis of the data, and let you know that even more research is on the way, and give some time for questions. So that's what we're going to cover in this hour today. So I want to share a bit about the state evaluation report, which is what we're drawing our data from. This report was a culmination from our survey that we did last summer. We had respondents up to like 2,000 Canadian charities that responded to our survey and let us know how they were measuring and evaluating their work. So we learned a lot about the staffing, the resourcing, and how this work is getting done across the country. We also released a companion piece in the fall of 2018, specifically on Ontario nonprofits. And this was done in partnership with the Ontario Nonprofit Network, Taylor Newberry Consulting and was kindly funded by the Cancelling Foundation, the Ontario Trillium Fund, and Ignite NPS. So we're really appreciative of their support on that Ontario piece. And if you're in Ontario and you're a nonprofit, please visit our website and check out how those findings compare to the national ones. It's pretty interesting. And all of this work was kindly supported by the RBC Foundation. So we're appreciative of their support here and their leadership in this measurement and evaluation space. And just to give you an overview of the main findings that we found from the state evaluation, just to give you sort of a lay of the land and to get to know the state of evaluation, 96% of charities are evaluating in some way. So that's great that a lot of people are engaged in this type of work. And we found that the important enablers for evaluation are support from organizational leaders and buy-in from staff as well as their stakeholders. And we found that the common barriers to evaluation are staff time and financial resources, which aren't too big of a surprise, I think, for people listening in, but we have data to back it up. And we've also found that charities are moderately happy with their evaluation. They give it around a 6 out of 10 when we asked if they were satisfied with their evaluation capacity. So that's positive news there. And we also learned that 21% of charities report at least one paid staff member they have that's devoted to evaluation. And as well, 22% report having worked with an evaluation consultant. So those are some key findings that we found just generally about what charities and nonprofits are doing for their evaluation work. And to further dive into what charities are evaluating, we looked at different aspects of their work. So we looked at outputs, outcomes, quality, impact, and return on investment as aspects that charities are evaluating. So I just want to take a moment to clarify these terms that we use, just because I'll be referring to them throughout the webinar and want to make sure we're all sort of on the same page. So when we talked about outputs, we define this as how much your organization did. So things like the number of clients, the number of workshops conducted. So a lot of organizations are doing this, so 78%. When we talked about outcomes, we define this as the direct effects of your organization's work on the people, group, or cause that they serve. So again, a high majority of charities evaluating this aspect. Quality was how well your organization carried out its work. And impact we defined as broader effects of your organization's work beyond those that you directly serve. So this is more like a systemic long-term impact. And ROI, we defined as comparing the social and economic value of your organization's work with its cost. And you see as the aspects get more complex, charities are less likely to do these things. And so we compare this to what funders are asking. So specifically foundation funders, what they're asking for when it comes to evaluation. So this was interesting. We found that charities are meeting or even exceeding expectations of funders when it comes to things like outputs, outcomes, and quality, which is great news and is something that I think charities can take away as a good story here. When it comes to impact and ROI, we're seeing a bit of a misalignment here that funders are requiring charities to evaluate this a bit more than what they're actually doing. So this sort of disconnect was interesting for us. And when we looked at sort of the methods that charities are using to evaluate, we asked for a number of different ones because we know charities evaluate in different ways. So things like admin data, stat compilations is sort of those counts, like number of beds provided, surveys, interviews, and things like that, to more complex things like standardized assessment tools, case studies, experimental studies as well. So what charities were doing, again, a similar pattern here, using very quantitative measures and things that are a bit more simple to measure. And as it gets more complex, we see standardized assessment tools 16%, experimental studies 7%. So charities are less likely to do those things as the complexity increases. And again, we looked at what grantmakers are asking for, what they want. So specifically foundation funders, we're seeing that charities are exceeding, again, or meeting expectations for these quantitative measures. But that same story emerges when we talk about things that are more complex, like logic models, standardized assessment tools, case studies. That gap in that misalignment story is rearing its head again. So that was interesting to see how these two groups are evaluating. And so we wanted to look at what funders want, what foundation funders are doing themselves to measure and evaluate their own work. So again, I'll show you what charities are doing. We know that it's heavy on the outcomes, outputs, and quality. But when we look at what funders are actually doing for their own measurement and evaluation, we see that they're less likely to do things like outputs, outcomes, and quality, and more likely to do things like impact, measure their impact, and ROI. So we can assume from this that they're using the information that charities are giving them in terms of that outputs, outcomes, and quality, and using that to inform their impact and ROI statements. So really bolstering this kind of work and making the case for impact there. So these were some interesting comparisons that we were able to make in the data. So we can see that there's room to improve on both sides of this relationship and sort of bring these expectations a bit closer together. So when you're looking for things like evaluation criteria and trying to understand what funders want, we can use GrantConnect to give this information. So when you're looking at a funder, for example, this one is RBC Foundation, under the Programs tab, if you scroll down on that tab, you'll see that evaluation criteria is listed. Now I'm going to clarify that this is information that the funder is looking for to evaluate whether you'd be eligible for their grant, but it still has some good evaluation information there. Like you'll see the RBC Foundation prefers applicants who can demonstrate that they have an evaluation plan in place and that they have some measurable objectives set up. So this is some great information that you can use to inform your grant seeking and fundraising work. So another key learning from our research has been around what resources are available for evaluation work. And like I mentioned earlier, we know that financial resources are a big barrier to people's evaluation and measurement practices. 61% of charities told us that financial resources are a barrier, and it was tied with staff time. So again, this is not really a shock to those working in their sector. We know that time and resources are stretched, but specifically for evaluation, it still rings true. So when we dug a bit deeper, we asked charities about their funding specifically for evaluation, and we found that 1/5 of externally funded charities said that their funders provided funded specifically intended for evaluation. And within that, like we're looking at different types of funders, 19% of charities receiving government funding said that their funding includes money specifically for evaluation. And for foundations, we found that 13% were reporting this, and corporations much lower at 5%. So this low percentage in reporting, in charities reporting this dedicated evaluation, we found really interesting, and especially this corporations bit. It's an area of research we're actually planning to explore a bit further as part of our corporate community investment report that will be out later this fall. So this was an interesting finding for us. But at Imagine Canada, we've heard anecdotally that funders actually have seen this a bit as a challenge, and they're a bit puzzled by this because funders believe they provide some more funding and want to fund even more evaluation work. They're just finding that the uptake isn't there. So we've heard that charities aren't asking for this budget line as much as they're able to, and funders are willing to fund more. So we see this as a bit of a challenge in two different perspectives that we're hearing. So hearing this from the funder perspective, we actually want to ask you your insights here. What barriers have you experienced when asking for evaluation funding? When you're trying to make that ask, do you face any barriers? Let us know in the question box here. So thanks. We have Cindy letting us know that defining maybe outputs versus outcomes is a barrier. So some people are experiencing that funders aren't giving funding for evaluation. There's a lack of recognition of the real cost of evaluation, especially for developmental evaluations.
We've got some folks saying that oftentimes in applications there isn't a place to specifically ask for evaluation. Megan specifically said in relation to arts grants. And we've got a couple folks saying an inaccurate prediction of budget for this type of evaluation. Interesting as well is not, Danielle let us know about, there not being a clear division between evaluation and administrative costs as well.
Yeah, just to build on that one, I'm seeing one from Sue saying, grant guidelines clearly state that funding is not to be used for staff wages / operating expenses, which is how a program would be evaluated. So I think that's an interesting nuance that I think I know we see that wording very often in funders' statements of eligible costs and whatnot, and yet there's probably a degree of nuance that the funder's intending there that just isn't coming through. So this is really helpful feedback for us. Cool.
Yeah, it really helps to color our understanding here of what fundees are experiencing on their end. So thank you. And when you're looking for this evaluation funding, we want to let you know what we found in terms of what dedicated evaluation funding does for charities. And what we found is that this addition of dedicated evaluation funding allows charities to measure and evaluate a bunch of different aspects and increases their capacity to do so. So you'll see with generic funding, there's a great increase, but then as well, dedicated funding sort of takes it to that next level. So things like ROI, we see a big increase in charities being able to do this type of evaluation, and as well as impact. So these are it can really elevate the way you sort of promote your cause and your appeal for funds in this way. And as well, when looking at the methods, a similar pattern here, but even more pronounced. When charities are getting dedicated evaluation funding, they're much more likely to use all of these methods, except for other, but all of these methods to measure and evaluate their work. So we really see that it's linked to this higher capacity to measure and evaluate, and it can really give you some more tools in your toolkit to be able to measure and learn from your work. And additionally, we see that dedicated evaluation funding is linked to higher evaluation capacity. So charities let us know that they feel that they have greater financial and human resources available to do this work. As well, we've seen that this group getting dedicated evaluation funding has greater connections to groups or networks, whether they be informal or formal, related to evaluation. And this is particularly in the case with government and foundation funders. We're seeing this pattern emerge. So dedicated evaluation definitely does, we're seeing it as a correlate to strengthening charities' abilities to measure and evaluate. And another aspect of the survey was looking at opinions, what opinions different groups hold about evaluation. And for fundees, we asked them if they agreed with the statement. So the statement is, the specific measurement or evaluation findings that we report are driven more by funder requirements than our own experiences doing this work. So we found that 42% of fundees agreed with the statement. And we asked funders a sort of related question from their perspective. We asked them if they agreed with the statement. So the specific measurement and evaluation findings we receive are driven more by fundee experiences than our own requirements. And we see 68% of funders agree here. So we're noticing here that there is this disconnect between perspectives on who's really in the driver's seat when it comes to setting these measurement and evaluation criteria and using these findings. So another opinion we asked about was, we asked fundees if they agreed with the statement. Sometimes funders seem to ignore the measurement and evaluation findings we report in their subsequent decision making. For this opinion, 34% of organizations agreed with the statement, but what's interesting also to note is that 20% said they didn't know, and a quarter of that group were neutral in the statement. So this is something that fundees really either maybe aren't getting a lot of clarity about, or just they're just not decided on this statement. And for funders, we asked them again a similar statement from their perspective. We asked them if they agreed with the statement. So sometimes the measurement and evaluation findings we receive can't inform our subsequent decision making. And 57% of funders agreed with this statement. So again, with these, when comparing these opinions about evaluation, we're really seeing maybe a disconnect and just not a lot of alignment on what's going on. Additionally, we found that regular communications was a big driver in terms of how people perceived evaluation, their ability to do the work, and their opinions about it. So the left-hand column is those that have regular conversations with their funders, charities talking regularly with them. And on the right-hand side, it's those charities who are not having any conversations at all with their funders, or very, very minimally. And so when asked these questions, like, we find it useful to discuss findings with funders, we work collaboratively to determine what and how we evaluate, we work with funders to determine how to use findings, and funders see admission of failure as a learning opportunity, we see a big difference in how they perceive these relationships, and having these conversations is key. We're finding it's a key driver to really to how organizations are approaching evaluation, how they're making it more useful, and how they're seeing failure as learning, which we think is some really important components of evaluation. So we want to ask you, knowing this, do you talk regularly with your funder about evaluation? Is this something that you do at your organization? Alex is going to launch a poll for us, so we can learn from you.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear, how regularly you're talking with your funders about evaluation. So whether it's all the time, sometimes, maybe once or twice, never, or if you don't know, that's fine as well. So we've got quite the vast majority of folks saying sometimes, but we do have about 15 or 20% of the folks in the room saying all the time, which is great. Yeah, this is great. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, about 17% who said once.
Nice.
Perfect.
And so for those of you who are having these regular conversations sometimes, we want to know from you, what are these conversations like? Are they one-sided? Do your experience, are they both-way communications? What's your experience with your communications with funders around evaluation? Sorry, I should mention that specifically around evaluation.
Yeah, and feel free to enter your answers in the question box again. We've got a few coming in here. So some folks are saying that these conversations are, very helpful, positive, and even some have said that they can vary by funder. We have a few that said, they're scary, and sometimes they can be, but for the most part, funders are fairly receptive to hearing from you in any point of the process.
I really like the comment from Danielle. Usually only discuss evaluation with funders when discussing reporting requirements. So it seems to be fairly fixed or constrained conversations, which I think those of us in the room that have applied for funding can very much relate to that as well. And an interesting comment from Manuka. Sometimes there are unrealistic expectations in terms of the program outcomes and the results they want to measure. Fascinating. Mm-hmm. Yes, that is so interesting. And to Megan's earlier comment, I think that also reflects sort of the disconnect, the trend or the theme of disconnection or misalignment that we're seeing in this research. And from Jackie, the importance of being educated, both on from her perspective on the funder side. The more educated a funder is about evaluation, the more robust the conversation, and the acceptance that less than the objective target is okay. Fascinating. Foundations are best to speak with from Corrine. Government least receptive to contact of any kind. Interesting. Yes. Yeah. And Lori, you're saying you're not getting any questions on your screen. There is no question on your screen right now. It should just be the slide.
Yeah, the questions just come to us directly for everyone on the line, so you actually won't be able to see the questions. That's why we're sort of going through and reading a few of those out, but feel free to ask those in the question box throughout. And if you have asked specific questions so far, we will be able to touch on some of those live at the end of the session.
Yeah, and what I'll add, Cindy, I think you've given us a nice segue into the next section, which is finding out what info they want/need to know versus what we want to evaluate for our purposes. I think that's great, and maybe Alex, you can take it from there.
Yeah, and that's a great sort of segue into our next piece of conversation here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing with us. It's great to get this feedback from you. And so knowing all this data, we really had some key takeaways that we wanted to impart with you and share our learnings with you. So one of our takeaways is that funders want you to ask for dedicated evaluation funding in your proposals. So this is something we've heard loud and clear, and our tips for this are around sort of embedding evaluation in your planning from the outset. It's not just something that happens at the end, it's something that can be integrated throughout your pipeline. And building your comfort with diverse measurement and evaluation strategies. So getting familiar with the language that's being used, things like outputs versus outcomes, and staying on top of current evaluation practices is really important. And also adding evaluation to your proposal budget, like adding it in as a budget line. We've added a handout on your control panel. You'll see a handout bar, and in that handout, you'll see the state of the SIF evaluation budgeting quick guide. So we've linked that resource there. It's something that we found shared on the Knowledge Center that OTF, the Ontario Trillium Fund, runs. So that's a great resource to get started in terms of learning about what goes into evaluation budgets and what people are typically asking for when it comes to this budget line.
Yeah, and maybe if I can jump in here and just add, like, through some of the conversations we've been having most recently with funders, just kind of as we not shop this research around, but socialize it around, is that they're really befuddled by the fact that charities aren't asking for funding or not asking for funding in the full amount, and there's something for them to be doing on their side for sure. But I think the thing that we've been feeling internally here is that, and we're going to hopefully embrace in our own fundraising as well, is really trying to be more bold and say that we're going to plan for evaluation, we're going to build it in, we're going to ask for it, not shy away from it.
Especially because we know that that dedicated evaluation funding can really enhance our own evaluation.
It's a win for everyone. Absolutely. Yeah.
And for anyone on the line who's just wondering where Alex mentioned you can find those resources, so just on the sidebar there is a section called handouts, which you'll be able to find those handouts there during the session, but you'll also receive those by email after the session with the post-session materials.
Yeah, great. And so another big takeaway that we wanted to share is that these outcomes for evaluation activities are better when both sides are aligned. So Haley sort of touched on this, that both sides are really key to making this relationship work when it comes to evaluation. But we really want to encourage you to start these conversations with your funders early about evaluation and keep them going throughout the grant life cycle. And so we really want to make sure that you understand how the funder is planning to use your evaluation results. I think that gets us better connected on what's going on and sort of helps to bridge that misalignment that we sort of showed earlier about how funders are using their evaluation and how charities are. So we think that those are some good tips to take away when when thinking about your evaluation activities.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in, because we are focusing mostly on what you as a charity or nonprofit, the grant seeker can be doing, but we don't want to ignore the fact that there is change that there's the work to be done on the funder side. So it's something that we're going to keep exploring here internally at Imagine and see how we can use, whether it's the state of evaluation or some of our other channels, to keep the conversation going with funders as well. Because I think both sides need to sort of come closer together to make sure we're speaking the same language and driving towards the same outcomes when it comes to evaluation, versus it just being a box to tick for both sides.
Yeah. In our experience, we found that funders really welcome this conversation. They're open to you asking questions, especially around confirming eligibility and interest, but also around like what metrics to be using. And as a result, through these conversations, you may find that funders may provide you with some additional insight on what to include, or some maybe shared resources or networks. As we saw earlier, having that dedicated evaluation funding really expands your connections to informal and formal networks. So that's a great way to sort of communicate with your funders. Mm-hmm. And so a way to stay connected by using the Grant Connect platform is one feature I wanted to highlight was the LinkedIn component to Grant Connect. You'll see on the left, we provide information about the staff and who's connected to that foundation or funder. And then that is also, you can connect your own LinkedIn account to see who's in your network and stay in contact in that way. So that's a way that you can keep up to date with who's at the foundation or organization and stay connected.
Yeah, and really keep the conversation going.
Yeah. And so this really got us thinking about the future evaluation and what it looks like in this fundee funder relationship, but as well as evaluation as learning for your own organization. So we really learned from this research that there's a perception that evaluation is really driven by funders, but there is some work to do there around alignment. So one thing that emerged was this sort of aspirational element of using evaluation for learning. And we really like this quote from this report done by Taylor Newberry Consulting. It's called Achieving Greater Impact by Starting with Learning, and it's also linked in that handout section of your control panel. But they define a learning culture when an organization uses reflection, feedback, and sharing of knowledge as part of its day-to-day operations. It involves continual learning from members' experiences and applying that learning to improve. Learning cultures take organizations beyond an emphasis on program-focused outcomes to more systemic and organization-wide focus on sustainability and effectiveness. It's about moving data to information to knowledge. So this, we think like organizations embodying this learning culture is the way evaluation is moving, and I think we can all get on board with striving to be learning organizations. I think that'd be really beneficial to evaluation practices, and what we've been hearing from people is where the future evaluation is going.
Yeah, if I can just jump in again. I should be doing that a lot today, aren't I?
Yeah, glad to have you here.
Thank you. Just that, like, we're hearing from both sides that charities, I think, us being one of them, really recognize that having evaluation being driven purely by the funder, or at least the sense of that, isn't going to be part of a sustainable, successful future. That it really needs to start to be happening from a more intrinsically motivated place, from the inside out. We're hearing the exact same thing for funders too. They want that as well. But right now, the current dynamic just isn't really allowing for that. But that's okay. We recognize that, and I think we know at Magic Canada that this is an area that maybe we can do some more work in. So yeah, sorry, back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Haley. We want to ask you though, knowing what a learning organization looks like, do you consider your organization a learning organization right now? Is it something that you feel you're doing right now? So Alex is going to launch that poll for us.
So the results are coming in. We've got about 50% of folks on the line have answered, and the vast majority have said yes. About 70% of people have said yes, and about 20% have said no. Mm-hmm.
Great,
yeah.
That's awesome. Especially when we're hearing that's a way that we want to move forward. It's great to see that a lot of people are getting there as well. Mm-hmm. And so we want to reflect on Magic Canada and maybe share a bit about what we're doing to drive evaluation from within and make evaluation useful for us. And so we've been using things like retrospectives, so really sharing outcomes of a project across the organization and really learning from each other internally to inform our future work and how we do things moving forward. We're also doing a lot of KPI tracking, and so some of that had originally gone to funders, and we wanted to make that useful for ourselves as well. So thinking of ways we can use this data we're collecting to learn from it and use it for multiple purposes. And we're also we've learned from this data that communication is key. So we're being more intentional with our communications with our funders, as well as being more regular in how we're chatting with them. So we have this data now that we can share with our funders and let them know. So we're really being intentional about doing that as we move forward. So that's what we're doing at Imagine Canada to implement, and we'd like to actually hear from you. As we see a lot of people are learning organizations, what measurement and evaluation are you doing to facilitate learning internally at your organization? We have a question from Christopher actually coming in of what KPI stand for. We define that as key performance indicators, and it's just a metric we use to measure our program and operations.
Yeah, and KPIs can definitely help you make smarter decisions too, based on the number of different factors. So yeah, great question, Christopher.
And so yeah, to just, if you can throw in the question and answer box, if you have anything that you're implementing right now that facilitates learning with your measurement and evaluation practices. We'd love to learn and share with everyone on the line here with us today.
We've got some input here from Cindy, who's saying that for these guys to facilitate their internal learning, they do sort of annual learning plans and tracking, and really base that on their growth goals. So yeah, if you guys have any other sort of insight, we'd love to hear from you in the question box. And I think that might be
From Jackie, review the state of evaluation and attending this webinar to kickstart and determine what is needed internally. That is awesome. Oh, yeah, actually we have a colleague who's listening in on this, and she's just reminded us of another thing that we're doing internally. And we're currently working with a theory of change model. I guess it's worth chatting about what a theory of change is as well. Alex, is that something that you feel comfortable speaking to, or?
Yeah, some people use it synonymous with like logic models in terms of looking at how your activities and inputs sort of break out into impacts. So what that journey looks like, that change, how you get from delivering a service and how that translates into an impact.
Yeah, what I love about it is it's a living document, and it's constantly asking you whether or not the things that you're investing in are really the highest points of leverage, I guess basically, and making sure that you're investing in the things that you think, and another aspect of logic model is also to experiment with those things and to test the theories out, so that if you're investing in a certain activity this year, that it likely will contribute to that longer term impact that you're doing. That's a really helpful strategy for tackling that feeling of doing everything and yet sort of getting nowhere at all, right? So that's what we're experimenting with internally, and I think a lot of us are very excited about that.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's a super interesting one here as well from Sue, who says that to sort of learn internally, they deal with metrics on programs, interviews with staff and clients, surveys of clients and families, especially, it looks like Sue is calling in from a social service agency, that it's sometimes hard or difficult to measure outcomes. So you can always think of measurement and evaluation not only quantitatively but qualitatively as well. Those things like interviews with staff and clients and surveys of how the work that you're doing is really having an impact is also a really sort of impactful piece in terms of your monitoring and evaluation.
Interesting. I'm seeing a bunch of different strategies, ways that folks are finding ways to create the capacity internally to do this kind of this kind of learning, whether it's engaging, a high skills volunteer, a self-proclaimed evaluation nerd, as it was stated by Cindy. That's a great idea. And I know that there was a question actually elsewhere about how to do that, how to find those evaluation nerds, whether they're pro bono or fee-based. There are going to be some questions here that we probably can't answer today, just because I think we'd want to give a bit more of a considered approach to. And so for any question that we haven't answered today, we will share some of our thoughts as well as relevant resources in the follow-up email.
Great.
Oh, I like that from Devin. Simple ways to get going is turning your qualitative goals into quantitative metrics. That's interesting. I wouldn't mind hearing an example of that. Seeing lots of people using theory of change, which is really interesting, and really reaffirming that we're also on the right track here. And pre and post test interviews, measuring changes in client well-being, fabulous. This is great. Lots of good stuff happening internally. It's really good to hear. Yeah, we're all on track.
Yeah,
that's the moral
and exciting
here.
that we're all sort of learning together
Yeah.
as we go through our measurement and evaluation practices. And so another thing that Magic Canada is doing is chatting about continuous improvement. So how evaluation can be built into moving forward more effectively and together. So to do this, to sort of spark conversations around continuous improvement, we're hosting an event series called Summit, and we're gathering from across the country to talk about how continuous improvement and design thinking can be implemented in organizations. And so because you all have spent your time with us here today, we are going to offer you a discount. We want to see you there as learning organizations. I think it's great to gather with your peers who are also learning organizations, or even for those who haven't got started with this learning journey. I think it's great to learn from each other. So we'd like to offer you our $35 community pass option. A regular pass is $295, so this is a great saving. So we want to encourage you to join us. We're having events from May to June, and they're going to be across the country in Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, Halifax, and Montreal. And Toronto's event is actually next week, so we'd encourage you, if you're in the city here in Toronto, to register as soon as you can to not miss out on this opportunity. So you can use the code provided there at the bottom of the screen at your checkout to sort of redeem this offer. But we're really appreciative of all of you joining us here today, and want to keep sharing these learnings together. So we think Summit would be a great opportunity to do so. And finally, we wanted to let you know that for these resources that we talked about here today, as well as the webinar recording, these will be available on our Help Center as part of our Grant Connect platform. Now, this website is not only just for Grant Connect subscribers, it is an open source platform. So for Grant Connect subscribers, you can access it through that question mark on the top of your screen when you're logged into Grant Connect. And we'll also share the link to this link for those of you who aren't subscribers and want to access these resources. But under Grant Connect coaching, that link that's circled there, you'll see this webinar and like I said, our research and tips and tools, especially on how to use the Grant Connect platform as well. An exciting thing that I also wanted to share is that there's more research to come. So the data from this webinar is from both the National State Evaluation Report that was released last month, but also a report that's upcoming. It's a report on the role of funders and specifically diving into these evaluation practices there. So we'll be sure to send you all a copy of this report when it comes out in the coming month. So keep your eyes peeled for that, as there are going to be a lot more data on measurement and evaluation there. As well as we're releasing some subsector reports. So for those of you in the health sector, arts and culture and recreation, social services and education, these are subsectors that we're releasing a bit more analysis on. So if you read the national report and really want to know how your subsector measures up and want to sort of benchmark how your subsector is doing, these reports are a great way to read more and learn more about it. So those are also upcoming. We encourage you to follow us on social and on our Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, but also
and
on
Instagram.
And Instagram, yeah, our new social platform, and as well our newsletters, because we'll be communicating when these reports are released there. So I'm looking forward to sharing all that data with you, and hopefully that gives you a lot of insight into what the state of evaluation is in Canada today. So we want to leave some time for some questions here. So feel free in the question box to drop some questions. Anything you've been thinking about throughout the webinar. We'd love to have a bit of Q&A here. Like Haley said, some things that are more maybe detailed, we might have to take those offline. But please feel free to throw your comments and questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Great. So we've actually had some questions sort of coming in as we've been going through the session. So we probably have time for about 3 or 4 questions, depending on sort of the length of the answers here. Really quickly, Jackie just asked, will the presentation be sent to us? Yes, for sure. We're going to be sending you guys the slide deck, the recording, and all of the handout resources that we've sort of been speaking about throughout the session today. So yeah, great question there. Another question is someone was asking, where does the data, like where did we get the data from this report or from either report in terms of, how we actually took all this information in?
Great question. Yeah, thank you. So the survey was conducted between May and June of last year, and it was an online survey. We sent invitations to almost 8,000 charities from across Canada and received about 2,000 back. So those respondents from charities across the country, different revenue sizes and organization types. That's the information, that's the data that we're getting. We weighted these to reflect the sector, and yeah, that we're appreciative of everyone who responded to our survey. It's great that we can get this information and people can share and learn from each other.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got another question here from Jackie, just from a few slides ago, asking if you could just talk about the, what we consider the definition of regular conversations being with a funder.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Yeah, we think throughout the granting process, it's considered regular, from when you're applying and reaching out all the way to the stewardship phase, and even beyond. And we think that is defined as regular.
And in my sense, Alex, and I know you're more intimately involved in the research, is that was actually how the question was asked, was more regular, versus not at all. And so there might have been a little room for interpretation there. But really, the market differences between those that don't communicate at all with those that are even having 1 or 2 conversations, there seems to be significant improvements in how they're experiencing evaluation, the benefits they're receiving from it, which is really, what we want, right? You're investing a lot of resources in this work. And that was, again, the big takeaway was the more that you're involving the funder and engaging this work as a partner, the better. So, okay, good. What's the next question, Alex?
Great. So we've got another question here. Let me just scroll up and find that question. So this question here is actually a really interesting one from Manuka. So she says, being a foundation that both receives grants and offers funding, I've reflected on how much we could improve in communicating with our grantees regarding evaluation. Do you recommend standardizing the general expectations of our organization regarding evaluation, or keeping it flexible, kind of more ad hoc, sort of a case-by-case basis, considering the different nature of the types of projects that we fund?
Yeah. First of all, Manuka, you rock for thinking about these things. That's awesome. And so glad to have you here today. Yeah, my take on this, and Alex, I think you maybe had 2 cents to share as well, sure. But I do think sort of the middle ground approach is probably what's best, and giving some structure, because you're probably going to have grantees coming in at various levels of maturity in terms of their own comfort with evaluation and capacity to do it internally. So giving some basic guidelines around what you would be looking for in terms of evaluation would be really helpful, even if it's just laying out what the most basic forms of evaluation, what questions you want answered, those kinds of things. But also I think building into practice, if it's not already there, in communicating quite clearly the fact that you invite the fundees or the applicants to chat with you about evaluation expectations, framing it from both what you as a funder need that information for your own internal evaluation, but then also working with the fundee to ensure that the evaluation is also going to serve them as well. I think that's the kind of dynamic that this research suggests would be the most productive for everyone.
Yeah, we saw that opinion slide about how charities don't know where their evaluation findings go. I think offering that level of transparency in terms of how those findings are used would seem to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think also create a bit more motivation too. Like I think sometimes I've felt in doing reporting here internally that it's, it's a formality, it's kind of annoying, blah blah blah. But being able to see where the evaluation, the analysis work that I'm doing and the work I'm doing to set up the evaluation framework, even how that feeds into the funder's own goals and progress and everything, I think would be very, very helpful. So
yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and we've got another question here. So it's a question from Megan, who's saying, organizations that don't currently do a lot of communication with their funders about evaluation, what are some good ways to start this as a regular practice? Is it as simple as a cold call and sort of chatting and asking, or is it something that has to be sort of tied into other actions that they're undertaking? I can take this one if that's okay. So for me, what I would suggest is that you do that. You do something as simple as a cold call and sort of start a conversation that way, as much as it can feel scary or stressful or kind of intimidating to reach out with that sort of cold call phone call. It really is going to sort of get that relationship going and really start the conversation. It is a lot more personable when you can sort of quickly chat with someone over the phone than sort of sending a quick email just to kind of confirm some things. And as Alex said before, having that quick phone call, they might leave you with some insight on how to improve your approach or your application or the way that you're considering evaluation. So definitely recommend sort of just picking up the phone and giving a quick call, which is, as I said, a great way to sort of start that relationship and have them sort of remember you over the rest of the applicants that sort of haven't taken that sort of secondary step to reach out and really kind of connect with them and liaise a bit further.
Thanks, Ella.
Yeah, and I think framing it from the perspective of you wanting to understand them and their priorities and whatnot really gets it off on the right foot. And you don't have to, achieve anything significant in that meeting other than just starting the conversation and letting them know that it matters to you, that that you're able to evaluate the your activities and whatnot and feed that back to the funder in a meaningful way. I think that could be really helpful for both sides, right? So
for sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for submitting their questions. I think we've had some great discussions, and we've learned also a lot from you through your participation through this webinar. So really excited about this back and forth that we've had, and excited to learn with you. So if you want to contact us, if you have further questions, if you're thinking about this webinar after it's over, give us a shout at the emails provided below. Any questions specific to Grant Connect and how that platform can help you with your evaluation work or your grant seeking, email us there. And for specific questions about state of evaluation, please feel free to email our info@box, and we'll be able to direct your question to the best person here. And again, I wanted to thank you for joining us. We'll be sending out the recording of the webinar and all the materials to you tomorrow. And as well, don't forget about that discount that we're providing for being a registrant today. We'd really like for you as learning organizations or organizations that want to learn more to join us at Summit this year. So thanks very much, and we hope to see you sometime soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.